All right, so let me hear some of the things for part one that you found humorous. Part one, and let's start with Andrew. A couple of the things that you thought were pretty good.
In order to feed him, they had to like use all their resources.
The fact that he is, anyone remember the exact number?
It's like 1,600 something.
It's like 1,700, I think it was like 1,700, something like that. But the fact that they had to use up so much food just to feed him. In fact, the food aspect directly corresponded to other aspects of bodily functions. You probably noticed, especially in parts 1 and 2,
Talk a lot about peeing.
he's obsessed with bodily functions. Peeing, pooping, any sort of potty humor. And I'm going to venture to argue that that is because poop has always been funny. It's always been funny, okay? You're looking at 1700s. You go back to Chaucer in the 1400s, okay?
Fart.
It's hilarious. Potty, bawdy humor.
I read a summary of The Miller's Tale.
Funny.
Weird.
Weird and funny.
So weird.
Right? Gulliver spends a lot of time talking about his bathroom habits. And he always does it by pretending to be embarrassed about it. At one point he says, I discharged my uneasy load, which referred to pooping. And what happened every time he pooped?
Wheelbarrows.
People had to cart it out in wheelbarrows. Imagine being one of the people with that job. Okay?
It would take a long time.
Yeah, it would.
Two wheelbarrows.
Think about all the times he talks about peeing in section 1. When does he use pee to help situations?
Put out a fire.
Let's have a fire. Okay? Then there's the scene later in section 1 where he's standing like this and all the troops are passing under him. And he says, and he always does this with using elevated language. He says, the condition of my breeches at this point were in such a state of disrepair that it caused regard for much looks of admiration and awe. Which is to say, my pants had a bunch of holes in them, so when people looked up, they were like, whoa, dude. Okay? He's obsessed with this sort of thing. And the food is a big issue. The way that he gets around, he gives lots of descriptions about this and how that works. Sam, something you noted funny in part 1.
I just had how much food he intakes and how like they have to help him when he like poops and pees and stuff.
Exactly. All of that works. Ola.
How there was like a dispute between the high heels and the low heels, and then the guy with the two mismatched heels.
We have the party systems. Okay? Now, this obviously is a historical context. So Swift is writing in England during a time of the parliamentary system, during the time of the Whigs and the Tories, and all kinds of governmental unrest. However, he's writing about universal situations of government. So if you think about this in a modern context, where we have, say, a two-party system, although really kind of a three-party system. You've got Republicans, you have Democrats, you have the undecided, you have Libertarians, you have all these different views going into government. And then if you consider how easily those grounds are shifting, and yet how people feel like they have to conform to a set of beliefs associated with each of those systems, what Swift is mocking here is quite universal. In other words, it's saying that people will divide themselves along the silliest of lines. Like the heels, and what's the other big division? The eggs. How do you break your egg? Do you break it on the smaller end or the bigger end? Never mind breaking it in the middle, okay? But when you notice how people are willing to die rather than break it on the opposite end they believe in, what is that mocking? What's that making fun of? Extremism, and as humans, our propensity to do what?
Be stubborn.
Be stubborn, and also to ascribe ultimate belief to things that don't really matter in the end. You know, we're like, I will not do that. I do not believe in that. I am so strong against that, I would rather die than do this thing. And often we look at that as quite noble, but in the big scheme of things, is it noble or is it kind of dumb? And so this egg thing was a huge ordeal. It caused this big split. It caused this division between regions, and as a result, caused a war. Huge, okay? And a lot of that goes back to governmental issues. Noah, another example of humor in part one.
No, I thought it was kind of funny that Gulliver would destroy all of them, but he was kind of subjugated to their will.
Several times when he's tied up or when he's in chains or whatever, he thinks,
Clearly destroyed them, right?
what's that?
I couldn't tell exactly. Isn't he way bigger than any of them? Like, couldn't he just
He's
kill?
1,700 times larger.
Why does he just, I don't know.
At several points he thinks that. He thinks, I could grab 30 of them and dash them all at once. And you have to admit that'd be a bit of a temptation. And here's how I know that'd be a temptation. Because when you were a kid, or even last week,
Yes.
and you found an anthill,
No.
you know how tempting that is. Maybe not anymore.
Those ants have feelings.
I know they have feelings. And you know the reason you think they have feelings? Because of all the Disney and Pixar movies that have come out that have shown you the poor little ants. And there's always
They
the
have
scene with, like,
families.
with the big shoe coming
Yes.
down.
What do you
think-
think?
what do you think of
Why would you use a
that's
foot when you can use a magnifying glass? It's a lot cooler.
The point is this. We often treat with contempt that or those which are smaller than us. And it's because we can. We absolutely can. And it's fun. Why? Because all of our lives, we've been treated with contempt by those bigger than us.
Oh, it's like the guy who dropped in and the
Exactly.
midget, but he's
All his life, he's been the small little one center of attention. Here comes Gulliver getting the center of attention, and he's mad at Gulliver. Now, in Lilliput, Gulliver often thinks, I could grab all these people and just kill them, just destroy them. Something keeps holding him back, but several times he thinks that, which really is kind of a universal scenario for us whenever we have people that we have control over. And, you know, sometimes you hear parents that say this to their kids, I brought you into this world, I can take you out of this world, okay? Because there's a sense of power that comes with that, power over somebody. And so that's a subject of satire. Other examples of humor that you saw in this section.
How people were elected to office.
Okay, explain, because that's hilarious.
Whoever would jump the highest for the king.
And the funny thing is, these people aren't aware of how ridiculous this is.
Did
They jump the highest.
actively vote dumb people in? Because
They
they
have-
thought it
was
would
it
be
the-
bad when you're dumb instead of bad when you're
What's that
smart.
part two?
That's in part two, but in part one,
Oh, okay.
the methods they use to prove who's the best have nothing to do with office, have nothing to do with intellect. It's all just physical skill. And we look at that and we're like, oh my gosh, these people are idiots. But then we think about our system. We think about what's required to get into some sort of political office here. Is it really that much different? Obviously, we don't have them jumping, but we have them getting on television, wearing, you know, whatever clothes are going to be most attractive to the audience. Some of you saw, it wasn't a very good movie, but it had good elements to it. The Will Ferrell, Zach Galifianakis.
Oh yeah, the campaign.
The campaign. They came out right in the midst of all the campaign
Yeah, that's
and
good
everything.
as well, yeah.
Satire, but a lot of truth to it. It's all in how you spin it, it's all in how you present yourself. And so really so much of this is true for us. I want to look at one particular page in here. It's going to play this up. It's on page 59. Check this out. The Lilliputians and what this says about us. Bottom of page 59. This is the emperor of Lilliput speaking. Now I want you to picture for a moment the President of the United States who can stand up and say, I, insert full name, first, middle, last, number, 44th, 53rd, 63rd, 65th President of the United States of America. That's the title, big title. This is a Lilliputian, the Emperor of Lilliput, who basically rules over a land the size of downtown Mason and believes himself to be the greatest gift to the world. Listen to his title. Golbasto Momorin Evlemi Gordulo Shefin Muli Uli Gu, most mighty emperor of Lilliput, delight and terror of the universe, whose dominions extend 5,000 blustras, about 12 miles in circumference, to the extremities of the globe, monarch of all monarchs, taller than the sons of men, whose feet press down to the center, and whose head strikes against the sun.
So small.
He's 6 inches tall. Actually, he might even be 3 inches now, think about it. He's basically this big, standing on Alex's desk, and that's what we would do. We'd be like, you are so darn cute. You think you're so big and powerful? Look at you. I could just squash your head right now. It wouldn't even take much effort. Boom. But he says, I am the delight and terror of the universe. I am the monarch of all monarchs. I am the biggest, most powerful person in the world. We look at him and we're like, that's funny. That's funny. Okay? But then we step back and we're like, oh, now I get it. Because what's the target of satire in that one line?
Us.
And what?
The fact that we think we're very important on a universal scale.
Our perception of ourselves and the importance we have in this world. You know, by God, we're Americans. Does it really matter in the scheme of things? I love this, the ending scene in the first Men in Black movie. After they kill the big bug monster, and the camera begins zooming out. It zooms out of New York. Then it zooms out of the globe.
Oh, yeah.
Then it zooms out of the solar system. Then it zooms out of the galaxy. And it keeps zooming and zooming and zooming and zooming and zooming and zooming until eventually you see that all of that is contained in one tiny little marble. And that marble is on some sort of weird planet being played with in a game of marbles by 2 fat aliens. They finish their game, they throw all the marbles in a bag and close the bag. And that's the end of the movie. Which suggests that all of our huge dealings and huge importance in the universe, we are but a speck on a marble in a game being played by aliens of no consequence to anybody. Just a reminder about our place in the world. Here you have a tiny little Lilliputian who thinks that he's the center of the universe. In the scheme of things, probably not. Now, in this whole section of Lilliput, you have Gulliver dealing with these small people, but with a big perception. He leaves Lilliput, and once again, is shipwrecked. Not really shipwrecked, he's abandoned.
Yeah.
He's left by all of his shipmates on Broadway Ag. And all of a sudden, the scenario is reversed. He went from being Man Mountain, Quemgus Flibrin, to being tiny, little, cute, little person who thinks he's all big and powerful. The perspective has shifted. Everything has changed in this way. Where do we see elements of humor in the second section? What was funny? Yes, Sam.
How disgusting he found the women, like the women.
The breastises, right? This is absolutely hilarious. Because it's playing upon a universal sort of attribute, which is a lot of men would find themselves in a sort of heavenly state to be thrown into cleavage. Okay? To just be thrown, picture this, thrown into cleavage. Right?
Yes.
You're thrown into
I'm
cleavage.
picturing it. You,
That is the
you're
motion.
okay.
I'm picking Alec up and I'm throwing him into cleavage.
Is it big cleavage or like regular cleavage?
Okay, but see, for Alec, in
It's
perspective,
big.
it's big
It's big
cleavage
no
because
matter
he's gonna get stuck in it.
Oh, you mean that big? of
Yeah, we're not
okay.
talking like, yeah, he's like, I'm throwing, it's like throwing
So
a
it's like
fly
two couch cushions.
into-
kinda.
into like a wall of honey. He's gonna get stuck in it. I'm throwing him into cleavage and he's stuck in the cleavage. Now, in the perception, it's like, oh yeah, cool. Except the problem is, Gulliver is now 1/1700th smaller than all of them. So he's thrown in there, and what does he notice? What does he realize? It smells bad, which is nasty. It's horrendous. Ugly, porous. He sees all the holes. On one of them, he sees a hole of cancer. Okay? A huge cancerous hole. Picture this for just a moment. And some of you may have these at home, but those massively magnified mirrors, like the 1000 magnification or whatever, I always see these in Brookstone. And like you're walking by, you're like, oh, check this out. And you look in the mirror and you're like, oh, what is that? And it's your face, right? but it magnifies everything about your face. The minutest of imperfections is massive in these mirrors, okay? You might look at passing in a mirror and you're like, oh yeah, everything's fine. But then you look at one of those and you're like, good God, this is horrendous. It's like a cavernous, it's like some sort of like mammoth caves or something in my face. And you know, what that does is it shows us a perspective that no one else will ever see. Unless someone puts a magnifying glass up to your face. But that's what Gulliver's perspective is. Everything has shifted for him. Everything is different. So now imagine what the Lilliputians were seeing with Gulliver, or when they would look at Gulliver or smell Gulliver. Everything is different. It's shifted. And so that's really funny because Gulliver is now like picturing all of these women with this smooth, white, soft, beautiful skin in England. But then thinking, if I were the size of a Lilliputian, they'd probably be nasty and smelly and all of that. So what does this suggest about perspective? Or comparison?
That it always has two sides.
Gulliver actually touches upon this. And another reason that I wanted you to read this version is because of the footnotes. Check out this footnote here. I think it's page 94. This is awesome. Okay, yeah, bottom of page 94, here it is. Gulliver's thinking about this idea of Lilliputian versus Brobdingnag. And at the bottom of the page, she says this: undoubtedly, philosophers are in the right when they tell us that nothing is great or little otherwise than by what?
Comparison. Capital C.
Nothing is big, nothing is little unless you do what? No one is smart, no one is dumb unless you compare. No one is fast, no one is slow unless you compare. Everything is comparison. And the footnote says this: Swift's friend, George Berkeley, was one philosopher who emphasized the relativity of our judgment. The relativity. How everything is relative. Everything is comparative. No one is inherently beautiful or ugly unless you compare that person to someone else or to something else. A tree is not tall or small unless it's compared to other trees. So what does this suggest about human nature? Everything for us is a comparison because everything for us has an attribute. Someone is strong. Why is that person strong? Well, because that person is stronger than this other person. You can only be something by comparing yourself to someone else. There's the comparative degree and there's the superlative degree. That's what this entire section hammers upon. Gulliver is constantly trying to visualize himself in perspective or in relation or in relativity to these other aspects. Okay, another example of humor in section 2. What else do we have?
The fact that the greatest threat to his life was a monkey.
Something cute, something, cuddly and all of
I
that.
thought it was really funny.
And all the people were like, oh, look at this. Gulliver's in fear for his life. But they're looking at it as, oh, this is hilarious, this is entertainment. And it kind of reminds us how often we see those who are smaller or littler or perceived as less than in an entertaining light, as a spectacle. That's another idea here.
This is a great children's book.
It's a great what?
It's a great children's book. You said that kids were reading this. This is teaching kids good values.
The funny thing about this is, it's a hugely popular children's book.
Yeah, I read it when I was a kid, but it was like a dumbed-down kids version.
It's the Children's Illustrated kind of thing. Kids don't read this for the perspective of satire or the intellect behind it. They read it because the stories are fun. It's about a guy who in the 4th section talks to horses, and it's super cool. I remember watching a film version of Gulliver's Travels when I was a kid and loving the story, but not knowing anything about what was actually being made fun of or mocked. Because it works as a story in and of itself, but then below the surface there's all these other things. And here's what's really neat about it. Swift has 2 layers of satire. There's the first layer where he's mocking humanity and all of that. But he sets up Gulliver, and the very name Gulliver, as someone who's intensely gullible. Here's Gulliver, and he doesn't tell the reader whether or not we should agree with Gulliver. But what he's doing is he's making fun of Gulliver, which is in turn making fun of humans. But some people will read it and identify with Gulliver, and therefore be okay with it. Let me give you a key example. Do you remember the gunpowder scene with the king in Brobdingnac? Sam, can you recount the details of that for
A
me?
little bit. Wasn't it just Gulliver trying to, he was like trying to explain to the king like where he's from and like the government, and did he bring up gunpowder?
Yes. As a gift for the king, he's going to tell the king how to make gunpowder. King says, "What's gunpowder?" Gulliver says, "It's an amazing invention. You can put it inside these devices and fire things at other people and kill them. Or you could put large amounts of it in one big device called a cannon and fire a huge object that could kill multiple people at once, or at the very least, take off their legs or their arms. It's awesome." What does the king say? Why would I want that? Gulliver's like, "Dude, why wouldn't you want this? I'm telling you, you can kill people with this." The king's like, "Why would I want to kill people?" Gulliver's like, "What? Are you stupid? You gotta kill people to stay in power." The king's like, "I don't think that's true, actually. In fact, true inventions should be things that would better society, better people, that would ultimately make us into more well-rounded members of our civilization." Gulliver's like, "What an idiot. I can't believe you don't want to know how to make gunpowder." As a reader, we have a choice at this point. What are our choices between? Agree with the king or agree with Gulliver? Imagine the people who are going to agree with Gulliver, because it's super easy to agree with Gulliver. You're like, "Dude, king, you're being an idiot. If you have gunpowder, you have power. And if you have power, you have control. And if you have control, you stay in power. Duh." But yet the king makes an awful lot of sense. Talking about morality, talking about goodness, talking about the inherent positive nature of humanity, and how ultimately you shouldn't be destroying each other. That kind of makes sense, right? How war is ultimately a bad thing and not something we should seek after. So the layer of satire becomes more and more like that proverbial onion with different layers leading into the center goodness. Here's what we're going to do now. We are going to take a very short break, very brief break. And after the break, we are actually going to watch an episode of The Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
This episode pertains directly to what we just saw in Gulliver's Travels. Then, we've got a bit of a brief writing prompt after that. And then we'll be picking up our discussion of Paradise Lost. Today, the bulk of the time is spent on Gulliver's Travels, the lesser on Paradise Lost, because there's just so much I wanted to do with Gulliver's Travels. So I apologize that it's not really balanced there. But let's take a brief break, use the restroom, walk around if you need to, and then after that, we're going to watch a little bit of The Twilight Zone.